When you think about gacha games, you think about games like Fate Go, Genshin, Arknights, the big boys in the gacha gaming industry. But what if I were to tell you that there's a game that challenges these big games that isn't even available on global yet? A game that is predominantly dominant in one region. A game that has taken the country by storm and has raked in millions upon millions of revenue, even giving a run of some of the big boys that have global a global market. Around 2021, I started to notice a trend going around on YouTube. See, I watch VTubers, and some of these VTubers are Japanese, and I noticed that some of these VTubers were playing one game in particular. I noticed that they were playing a gacha game, and I thought, oh, I've seen this before. This is gonna blow over. People are gonna forget about this game in about a week, a month or so. While I did think that way at the beginning, the more I watched clips of these VTubers playing the game, the more intrigued I got. The game looked really great, and honestly, it looked pretty damn fun and it was completely different than any of the other gacha games that I've seen or played before. The game in question is called Uma Musume Pre-Derby. Around the same time, I also heard about an anime that was airing at the same time that bears the same name as the game. And with little to no shows to watch at the time, and because I was curious already, I thought, you know what? Let's give this a go. Let's give this show a go and see what all the fuss is about. I had very little expectations for this show. I figured it was going to be your typical 5, 6 out of 10 show, watch 2 seasons and then just forget about it. Little did I know that I would be experiencing the start of one of the fastest growing franchises in Japan. Horse racing is really popular in Japan, like really popular. It raked in, I can't remember, millions or billions of yen in revenue just over the past few years, and it's insanely popular as a pastime in Japan. So it's not really surprising that a company would try and capitalize on this and make a game that is very much focused heavily on horse racing. And among those geniuses are the people at Side Games. If you're in the gacha gaming sphere, Side Games is not an unfamiliar name, but to those of you who don't know who they are basically a Japanese gaming company that makes games like Grand Blue Fantasy, Shadowverse, Princess Canary Dive, just to name a few. They make a ton of games, and a lot of their games generate crazy amount of money. And in 2016, they decided to expand to launch a different game. Then some genius at Side Games thought, you know what? Japan loves horse racing. Why not we make a game about horse racing? The game would be titled Uma Musume, which is a direct translation to Horse Girls in English. In 2017, they released gameplay footage and talked about what the game was going to be about. You're able to compete in races, train your horses, and read through some of the game's storyline. More information was revealed over time, but in true Side Games fashion, they delayed the game in 2018. However, what wasn't getting delayed at the time was the game's anime tie-in. Sharing the same name as the game, Uma Musume Pre-Derby will be developed by PA Works and will act as sort of marketing tool for the game. Uma Musume Pre-Derby will be focused on Special Week, who is your typical girl from the countryside who is accepted to go to a school in Central, the hub of horse racing. On her way there, she stumbled upon a race and decided to take a look. There, she saw Silent Suzuka, the star horse girl, and instantly idolized her. When she arrived, she joined Team Speaker, one of the horse racing team there, and ends up teaming up with Silent Suzuka, and the series will focus on their relationship and their impact towards the horse racing scene. Now you can tell by what I just said that it is your run-of-the-mill mid-tier anime, and you're right. The story has nothing to write home about. There are some good moments here and there, but most of the series, most of the story felt predictable. They felt rather scripted, and when I say that, it's because if you watch a lot of sports media like I do, then there are some tropes, some cliches that these media would use, and Uma Musume is guilty of using that. I've mentioned before, cliches are nothing wrong to do. You can use cliches, but what matters is how you use them. And Uma Musume didn't really try to do anything unique with the cliches, and it felt rather boring. The show did have some really good characters, which was probably the main reason why I ended up finishing the show in the first place. I really did like some of the characters. The show also dealt with stuff that not many sport media that I've seen have dealt with, which I'm going to talk about later. But the best thing about the show has probably got to be the animation. For a show about horse racing, you expect a lot of running. And I have to be honest, I honestly thought that they would cheap out and use some bad CGI throughout most of the running sequences, which shows just how little expectations I had for the show. But no, credit where credit is due, the races was really fun to watch. Taking aside the character drama that happens in the races and all, the races were done really well. I think the animation was really stellar, and honestly, it blew my mind how well animated it was because again, I thought they would cheap out on this. The show had a lot of positives, but at the end of the day, it felt mediocre at best. From a non-biased point of view, I would probably give it like a 6.5, probably even a 6 out of 10 because it was just average. They would continue on with an OVA after that, which was just as mediocre as the main series was, and with the game being delayed once more, it felt as if this was the end for Uma Musume, or at least the hype was gonna die then and there. You're probably thinking that, well, if I like this series so much, then why am I calling it mid? Why am I calling it mediocre? And that's because the first season was exactly that. It was mediocre. However, side games learn from this, and they would learn from this really well because what came next was probably the catalyst, was probably the reason as to why this game, this franchise, grew big in the first place. We're in 2021 now. The game was finally released, and along came with it the second season for the anime Uma Musume Pre-Derby. The series will focus on Tokai Teiyo and Majuro McQueen, two of which were introduced in the first season as side characters. The second season will be focusing on their friendly rivalry and their impact towards the horse racing scene, somewhat similar to what the first season had to offer. At least, that's what I thought in the beginning. To go on a bit of a tangent, the stories from Uma Musume are somewhat adapted from real life. Tokateyo, Mijuru McQueen, Silent Suzuka, in case it wasn't obvious, these are names from actual real life racehorses, and the anime decided to take their stories and adapt them. I mentioned before that season 1 dealt with something that not a lot of sports media that I've seen have dealt with, and that was injury. In the first season, Silent Suzuka got injured halfway through the season, and it overall shaped the dynamic between the two characters. It didn't really change much in the show, but it was something different. And that's because this was based on the real life Silent Suzuka getting injured. And while the anime had a more beautiful ending to the story, the same could be said in real life, but that's a whole nother story. The reason why I'm telling all this is because this is what makes the second season so good in my eyes. Like I said before, season 2 will be focusing on Tokateyo and Majuro McQueen and their friendly rivalry, but not long into the series, Tokateyo gets injured. But not only that, but she would injure herself more and more as the series went on, and it got to a point where she had even contemplated retirement. I've watched tons of different sports media over the years, but I cannot really think about one sports series, story, whatever that I've seen that dealt with injury to this scale. Injury plays a massive role in sports. We often see young, talented, bright individuals that burst into the scene only for that talent to be shattered by injury. Teo was a promising talent and she was touted to become one of the best horse girls of all time, even matching the accomplishments of that of her idol Simboli Rudolph. But she didn't. What we instead see in the show was her dealing with, was her struggling with injury. How she went from optimistic to pessimistic. How this once bright and positive girl would be drowned in depression over something that she had no control over. While all this happened, we are also introduced to a new character by the name of Raishower. Raishower is a character whose personality was shaped due to public opinion. She dreamt of being a horse girl and bringing joy to others, much like what her name actually represents, bringing joy and happiness to others. Instead, when she won her race, people were disappointed. People were upset that their favorite didn't win. She no longer sees herself as the hero to bring people joy, but rather as the villain instead. She wasn't able to perform at her absolute best over the fears that people would be disappointed if she had won. Well, some of you might be thinking, oh, that stuff doesn't really happen in real life. Like, that's just an anime thing. And you might be right, but the whole thing about her mentality, her overall well-being, being influenced by the masses, being influenced by over what people think, was sort of interesting to watch. And for a show that disguises itself with this cutesy slice of life style show, lies more psychological elements that I had originally thought. While this is anime and characters do have their moment, it does not take anything away from the show. After everything that has happened, you cannot stop cheering for these characters, and by the time the final race went, I was left in tears. No other sports media has left me in tears, have moved me so much compared to what Uma Musume Pretty Derby did. Season 2 to me was not just the best sports anime that I've seen, but the best sports media that I've ever seen. At least one of the best sports media that I've seen. And while some people might not think that way, I think a lot more people would probably understand that this show is something special. The story is something special. And while trying to understand how this franchise got popular, this is probably the reason why. This is probably the biggest reason as to why this franchise, this game, this whatever got popular in the first place. Or at least it's one half of the reason. We're about what, more than 10 minutes in, and now we finally got to talk about the main bread and butter of this franchise, the game. The anime is, at the end of the day, just a marketing tool for the game, and my god, it was a brilliant marketing tool at that because I decided to pick it up. I do not understand a single lick of Japanese, but I am playing this game because I love this franchise so much. I don't want to explain too much about the game because, of course, it's in Japanese, so I don't really understand to the furthest extent, but I'm going to give my thoughts on the game nonetheless because it's really good. Out of all the gacha games that I play, Art Knights, Genshin, Fate Go, whatever, Uma Musume is genuinely one of the best gacha games that I've ever played. Side games usually put a lot on their stuff, on their IPs, but with Uma Musume, they went well and truly beyond. I played this game roughly around during launch, and I've been playing this game on and off for about 2 years or so. And the game has changed so much and yet is still the same even after these past few years. Almost every anniversary, almost every milestone that they achieve, they will add something new to the game. At the start, the game only had one game mode, but now, 2 years later, the game has 5 game modes, while all sharing the same basic concept, are different from each other that it keeps the game interesting. The game has some of the best graphics that I've seen from a gacha game, even rivaling that of Genshin. As a side note, I forgot to mention that these girls, these horse girls, are also idols, because of course they are, and the game has idle performances built in them. Whenever you finish a race, you can have your girls, you can watch the girls perform. Side games didn't really have to do this. It was a bit unnecessary, but as someone who is a fan of the franchise, a fan of the series, I absolutely love it. And hearing that music and seeing your horse girl perform at the end of a game mode, it is different because it gives you more of a sense of accomplishment. At least that's how I feel. While that might not mean much to a lot of people, it shows that developers really care about this game and are going to put in their absolute all to this game. And it's probably the biggest reason as to why this franchise got so popular is because this game has been put a lot of love and attention to it. Side games are treating this game really well. In 2021, the game became the top 10 highest grossing game in 2021 and ninth, and even reaching as high as third in 2022. In 2023, as of February, the game has earned more revenue than games like Art Knights, Fate Go, and a bunch of other gacha games as well. Keep in mind that this game is only available in Japan, or at least it's only predominantly played in Japan. I know there's a Korea version out there which didn't really go well, and there's some sort of controversy that occurred, which I'm not going to talk about, but the game for the most part is only available in Japan, and that's where the success lies in. The reason why this game works is because Japan just really likes horse racing, and couple that and making them into cute anime girls was just the golden ticket. The game would probably not work overseas, but I don't think side games will care because what they're doing in Japan alone is obviously working. While the game isn't perfect, of course, I genuinely think that this is one of the best gacha games out there, and I would put it in the top 5 gacha games that I've ever played. Side games struck literal gold with this, and seeing the work that they put into this game over the past 2 years, honestly, they deserved it. Both the anime and the game have a wide range of characters in it, and a lot of those characters have their own stories that could be explored in other media. I have with me here one of those stories, Uma Musume Cinderella Grey. Uma Musume Cinderella Grey is what happens when you take away the moe slice of life elements of Uma Musume and make it a shonen battle sports manga. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about Cinderella Grey because, if I'm being quite honest, it deserves its own video. But Cinderella Grey is very similar to that of Blue Lock. The manga is heavily similar to Blue Lock, sort of in the range of shonen, seinen, not really shonen, but not really seinen, sort of in the middle. It's being published by Young Jump, which largely focuses on seinen mangas. The manga focuses on Ogre Cap and her rise through Central and her story and her impact towards the horse racing scene, much like the anime did. But unlike the anime, of course, the manga just heavily focused on the horse racing aspect of it. The art style, absolutely incredible. Again, it's like Blue Lock. If you like the art style from Blue Lock, you're gonna like the art style for Cinderella Grey. The story is pretty damn good as well. Early on in the story, we see Ogre Cap just destroying opponents left and right. Nobody could even touch her. Even in Central, nobody could even touch her early on. And that's how different this manga is. This manga is not about a spunky, upbeat main character. This is about a character who is purely focused on one thing, and that's racing and that's winning. Much like Blue Lock, the characters have some special ability that makes them stand out. And compared to Blue Lock, it makes sense because it's not really easy to make a manga about horse racing. So the special abilities do make things a lot more interesting. Uma Musume Cinderella Grey is, to be perfectly honest, the best thing to have come out from Uma Musume. It is completely different from all the games. The story is a lot better than a lot of the other Uma Musume stories are right now. The manga is making huge waves in Japan, even finished third in the next Manga Awards 2021. And while that does have to do a lot with Uma Musume's rise in popularity, the manga itself is pretty good. Without any bias, personally, I genuinely enjoyed this manga, even if it had nothing to do with Uma Musume. This manga is pretty damn good. So if you're not sold with the slice of life aspects of the anime and you don't really want to play a Japanese gacha game, then I suggest giving the manga a go because it is genuinely pretty damn good. With the way things are going, I could only see this franchise going further and further into the future. The game had just celebrated their second anniversary, and they've also announced a third season for the anime, which is slated to be coming out this year actually, which is pretty surprising. They also announced Road to the Top, which is going to be a web series special, which looks more akin to the Cinderella Grey style story, and by the looks of the trailer, it looks really damn good, and I hope that there's English subtitles for it. The amount of things that side games are doing with this series, from the media, the stories, the themes, everything, as a fan, it's really great to see. The way you keep your franchise fresh, the way you keep your franchise interesting, is to introduce more stories, to introduce more things for people to get into. This is the best course of action for the franchise to grow, because this attracts a lot more people into this franchise. They are working really hard on this franchise and the rewards are there to see. They're making tons of money from this franchise, but it's not without reason. It's because they're trying so many different things to keep the franchise fresh, to keep the franchise interesting. It's the main reason why this franchise is so big in Japan in the first place. While I highly doubt that they will release an English version of the game in the near future, there's just plenty of other media for us to check out, for us to consume in the meantime. If side games continue what they're doing, Uma Musume could grow even bigger than it already is. And as a fan, I'm really excited to see what the future might hold. Anyway, thank you guys for watching this very long video. Leave a like if you do, subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you guys in the future. Peace.